Hello, everyone, and welcome again to this edition of the Christian Recorder Dialogues. We have joining with us today the 144th elected and consecrated Bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the Right Reverend Julius H. McAllister Jr., and his lovely spouse, Deana Young McAllister. Y'all know them as the Episcopal couple. I know him as my pastor. There were many times in Chicago soul food restaurants that the poor struggling grad student was fed by y'all. So it is an honor to have you here in this role, and we are excited for you to be reintroduced to the connection here. So welcome with us this evening.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having us. It's always a pleasure to be in your presence. And we remember from the day we met you back in 2007 as a doctoral candidate at the University of Chicago. And ultimately, you ended up joining our church, our former church, one of the churches where we served, a great institutional AME Church in Chicago, Illinois, and you changed our lives and instantly. And so we are grateful for the friendship and the relationship from that point to now.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, this is, I've had 3 pastors run to be bishops, and all 3 have been elected: Bishop Davis, Bishop McAllister, and Bishop Byrd. Wow. So I'm 3 for 3, so I feel kind of good about that. But one of my favorite moments of the many moments we've shared was in my graduation, and I know that you couldn't be there for the end of the day. We have festivities and parties, but the first face that I saw when I walked across the lawn on June the 3rd, 2023, at 8 a.m., this man took a red-eye flight, and my pastor. And I was glad that I could return the favor, getting up at like 3 o'clock in the morning to go to Morehouse to see your son, Julius Harrison McAllister III, walk across the stage. So I am honored and blessed, and that meant the world to me because you know what I went through at that school, and I'm just honored that you were there as my pastor. So let's dig into this. So, we know that you all come from AME legacy. We know this, but you make your own path. So tell us about the path that you charted to the AME Church.
Well, it's been a wonderful journey. We were ultimately born into the African Methodist Episcopal Church. We've served in various places, i.e. South Carolina, New Jersey, Atlanta, Omaha, Nebraska in the 5th District, served as a youth pastor in Detroit, Michigan, had the wonderful opportunity to pastor several churches in Chicago, and then to have the opportunity to serve one of the great pulpits in African Methodism, which is Bethel AME Church in Tallahassee, Florida, and had the distinct honor of serving as the senior pastor for the last 16 years. It's been a great journey. I'm a 4th generation minister, and if this makes any sense at all, supervisor is not only a 2nd generation Episcopal supervisor, but a 3rd generation first lady in the African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Wow. So I want to sit here for a second. When did you know that you were called to the ministry?
I felt that the Lord was calling me closer to ultimately my destiny as a junior in college.
Okay, and that was
where I received my baccalaureate degree from South Carolina State University in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And I had the opportunity to worship at Williams Chapel, AME Church in Orangeburg, but more importantly, really felt the foundation at my father's church where he pastored at Mount Zion AME Church in Florence, South Carolina. And I felt the Lord calling me, speaking to my heart, speaking to my spirit. And once I received the final confirmation from God, I knew I had to say yes to his will and yes to his way.
Wow. And I know, it's my dad was, and everyone expected that I was going to follow as a medical doctor. I knew that I was interested in research, but I knew that I was called to not be a cutting doctor, as my godfather would say, but a researcher. And I talked to my dad about it. And he said, son, I just want you to do your best. And I just want you to be who you need to be and who God is calling you to be. And he allowed me to be who I am. And I see many reflections of my father in what I'm doing, and I honor his legacy there. And from hearing you clearly knew this is not something that I've been pushed into. This is a path that is my path to walk in. And it's good to hear that surety from you. And so, Supervisor, again, third generation First Lady. That's something. And we know that being a First Lady is not easy. No. And so tell us about, when you decided, because also you've been very active with the Women's Missionary Society.
That's right.
You've done lots of work. So tell us about where you felt God calling you to serve within the church.
Well, the church is all I know. I am a product of the church. I am the best of the AME Church. I have been so blessed throughout the course of my life, just sitting under the tutelage and the parenting of my parents, the late Senior Bishop McKinley Young and retired Supervisor Dorothy Jackson Young. Many people tend to think when your parent or your father is in ministry or your mother, that at some point you are called to. But one of the things I think is important to share is that we're all called in some respect, right? I think people use that phraseology, many are called, but few should answer. I think many are called and everyone should answer where God has them to be. And just like yourself, you knew you were called in some sort of doctoral work, but yours was more research and maybe biblical based and not cutting. Mine, I do feel God calling me, but not for the preaching or pastoral ministry. Mine is education. And I have operated in that for the last 33 years. Within that, though, I have found my niche with working with the Women's Missionary Society, with the clergy families, with YPD, and in public education. And so although I don't wear the collar in the traditional sense, I don't receive an appointment, I sincerely believe my calling is to be that as it relates to leadership as a woman of color, as a woman of faith, supporting the ministry of my husband, and supporting the ministry of missions in its holistic form. So that's always been my calling, and I'm willing to say I've known that for years because I joined the Missionary Society at 18. And so I think it's important for people to know that we are called, but our calling is different, but it's still just as powerful.
That's right. That's right. And the thing on missions, and again, like I said, you two as a dynamic couple supporting each other. I remember in Chicago, the Come Home to Christmas, and that showed, that was a way that Greater Institutional was able to give the community, and it was phenomenal seeing what that church in the South Side did. And just, so I know you all worked together. I know you ministered together. So when did you decide that it was time to make the call to run for the Episcopal ministry?
I think the 33 years of ministry and being able to grow in God's grace and mercy, and being able to watch and see lives being transformed, and being able to play a major part in helping folk achieve their greatest aspiration in life. And after with having our Come Home for Christmas and raising the type of money we raised for the homeless and persons who came ultimately from disadvantaged backgrounds, children, and gave them shopping sprees to i.e. Target or Walmart or Sears, and to be able to raise $700,000 in 7 years. And then to see at Great Institutional, where we had the opportunity to walk in the footprint of Reverend D. Ransom, who started that church in 1900 and had we had the longest standing daycare in the city of Chicago, the after school program, the Federal Credit Union, and then to go to Bethel and to build all the homes that we ultimately did. I think about 85 homes at $14 million, and being able to see lives being transformed. I heard the call of God speaking to my heart that I could ultimately do this on another level. And I started feeling the tug. I started feeling the push. And so I started praying more, asking for God to order my steps and to make sure that this is what he wanted me to do as a family, the McAllister family. And we heard the call. We knew without a shadow of a doubt, he was calling us into that direction. And so we ran ultimately for 3 years and was all over the connection. I like to say in that 3-year period, we went to 115 annual conferences, mid-years, or planning meetings in 3 years. And God just did something special for us that we could not do for ourselves. And I was just grateful unto the Lord that the African Methodist Episcopal Church gave me and my wife an opportunity, that they didn't punish us because our parents were episcopates and supervisors, but they looked at our work and said, we believe, and let me underscore, believe they can make a difference in the lives of people in our Reformation.
And I think your election as the 144th, as the second of 6 in that class, speaks to the fact that that it was the denomination had, I mean, we made great choices, but you were elected on the first ballot. That was clear that we had our minds made up going into that on making that choice. And I think, because I know there were concerns. I know we had talked about, I said, look, this is my pastor. This is my friend. He just happens to have one last name, and his wife happens to have another. But knowing your work and your ministry and knowing what you've done and seeing what you've done, I mean, it's glad, like you said, I'm glad that we elevated you both to this role. But I have to ask, you all had both seen this on the other side and walked with your parents through this journey. So were there any moments where you were like, talk to us about that?
Well, what I can say is this: many people see this, and I'm sincere when I say many people tend to think this is more of a glamorous role, but really we have been elected for service. And that's one of the things that I think Bishop and I have realized in working with our families, both sets of parents, is that each of them in their own right, different and similar, saw this work as service. So in our eyes, we never thought about it as being, wow, we get to. What it is we need to serve at a different level so we can continue the impact. So I think that's really important to stress, that ministry is not easy. Being in this role is not easy. For Bishop to have to change or affect people's lives through appointments. The work that is ordained for us in leadership is very life-changing. And we have to take that seriously. So although we enjoy the work, we enjoy meeting the people, this is service.
Yes.
And in order to help our church grow and in order to continue bringing people to Christ, our work and witness has to be that of dedication, time and energy and effort, and putting people in place to make sure that God's will is done. So what I think we've learned from me looking outside in and also living it is that we've been elected to serve. To serve and be a blessing. So it's many people tend to think, wow, but it is time consuming. It requires planning and much prayer. It involves forming relationships. It requires us to stop and speak to people, to appreciate the least of them, because God has called us for such a time.
And let me just add this addendum. I remember some years ago, matter of fact, in 1992, it was this time 32 years ago, Friday. I was in the car with my father. We were coming back from a high school football game in Darlington, South Carolina. And I shared with him that I felt God calling me into the ministry. And he said these words, because I grew up in a context where my family never talked about any of us going into the ministry. There was only one person in my household who did that, and that was my grandmother. But my parents, we never talked about that within the framework of our home. And so when I shared with my father on that Friday night, coming back from a football game, he said, what I want you to do is to go back to school, and I want you to pray about it, because I want you to make sure that your daddy, excuse my unsophisticated language, but your daddy and your mama didn't call you into ministry. That is authentic. And now, after being in ministry for well over 30 years, I can appreciate those words, because he was absolutely right. If your mother or your father call you into ministry, it won't last.
Yeah. And I think I hear when you speak of Bishop McAllister, I hear my dad's word saying, you need to pick what you're supposed to do. You know, so let's shift a little bit. You mentioned family. So, you know, since I have both of you here, I've heard some stories, but tell us, you know, how did this pairing come to be? You know, walk us back down the sands of time.
Okay, so I'll start. Because this story is not going to be accurate.
Our stories are different.
I will say, so I remained at Bethel once my dad was elected and moved to South Africa.
That's Big Bethel, Atlanta.
Big Bethel in Atlanta on Sweet Auburn Avenue. And I was a member of the D.T. Babcock Voices of Inspiration, which was the main choir at the church. And Bishop came to Bethel because he was going to seminary. I was teaching at Oglethorpe Elementary School.
Wow.
And so I met him through church. Now he's going to give you this pie in the sky. He walked in, I was singing the doxology and saw him, and forever my life was changed.
There was like a
it changed
something, a light.
It changed exponentially. And when I walked in the fourth Sunday in August in 1993, I know the details. I know the date. It was the second worship service, and then the Reverend Dr. James Levert Davis, who now is one of our episcopates, was serving as the pastor, and Bishop Frederick Calhoun James at the time was the presiding prelate of the Second Episcopal District, and he was preaching. And I walked into the church, and my wife was singing, along with D.T. Babcock Choir, she was singing, "Praise God from whom all blessings," and I walked in, and it changed her life for the better.
So for the listening audience, if you believe that, look at my face, okay? But ironically, we did meet at church.
We did
meet at church. And so there are some nuances here and there, but we did meet at church. And he was a student at ITC. And I was a teacher at Oglethorpe. And so, like I said, this is my 34th year in education. I currently serve as an assistant superintendent in the Leon County school system, and it's life-changing. But our relationship has been always founded on or through and within the church. And because it's just that important to both of us. Strangely enough, my dad is no longer here, but when we were dating, or trying to date, this is a little tidbit or a nugget.
So you dated the bishop's daughter? Oh boy, let me hear.
So, but it was over, and he came back, and remember back in the day, you used to have a phone agent record with strict, right? And so, Bishop Julius called, and my dad was home. My mother was in Cape Town. I remember this. And I was doing something at home, and my father said, "Well, hold on." I heard him say, "Hold on." And he came running in. And he said, "There's a Julius McAllister on the phone." And I know it's not his father. I know his father's voice. And I went, "Oh my gosh, give me the phone. So I was like, I can't believe you did that. So I can remember that just like it was yesterday. But that was, we will be married 29 years this coming August.
Wow.
And so that's been over 30 years ago. So this has been a true partnership, and one in which I would not change it for anything in the world. And
there are 3 kids. I know Jay Harrison the best because that was, that's my Morehouse buddy. But tell us about your sons.
Well, our oldest son, Julius McAllister III, we affectionately refer to him as Jay Harrison. He's 25 years old, a recent graduate of Morehouse College, and is a housing specialist for the Tallahassee Housing Authority. And then we have our second son, who is 19, Colin McKinley Young McAllister. He's a student at FAMU, a sophomore, with a major in business and a minor in marketing. And also he is a fellow at the Wharton Business School in Philadelphia, and is planning to do an internship either in New York or in Los Angeles this summer. And then our youngest son is Dylan David Jeremiah McAllister, who's 17 years old, and he tells everyone in the household what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And all 3 of them, I like to say this, but all 3 of them have a special knack in making sure that they place something on our prayer list every 19 seconds.
I remember Dylan when he was
all of them. They were babies back then.
Anyway, before I have a heart interview, so tell us about the transition from the pastoral couple, because we know that's one thing, to now being in this Episcopal ministry.
Well, it has been an exciting journey. One thing, we were assigned to the 9th Episcopal District, and that was what we had prayed for sincerely. And so after the election and going back to Tallahassee, we then had to host the Florida Annual Conference. So we went right into hosting the Florida Annual Conference.
8 days later.
8 days later, Bishop was the host church, host pastor. And so that was huge. And then as the annual conference was closing, our first annual conference was opening.
The next day.
I remember watching some of I was like, how are they going to work this?
Yeah. It was amazingly busy, but nothing like it. It's been wonderful. So as for me and my mind sitting on the mission side of the work, it's been exciting for me to get to know the ladies, to look at the work, to set the parameters, to build on what the Seawrights had done, which is profound work in the 9th District. So as I'm getting to learn who these people are and their gifts and graces, we're growing together. And so for me now, it's not more local. I have to look at operating on a different level, district-wide. So what can be implemented effectively district-wide, and the accountability that it brings. Because not only are we required to do the work, we must report on the work we've done. Because God wants us to be good stewards of our time, energy, money, efforts, etc. So for me now, it's the expectation of whatever I'm asking, I'm modeling and offering that support and encouragement to include women of younger age, broadening our scope of what we do as it relates to 21st century missions work.
Bishop?
Well, it's been amazing. After being elected on the first ballot, 988 votes on August the 26th, and then being consecrated on the 28th, and then, as supervisor just simply said, moving from that point immediately into hosting the Florida Annual Conference, the next day leaving, going to my first annual conference, and going to the various annual conferences within the framework of the state of Alabama, the 9th Episcopal District, having 5 annual conferences, planning meeting, and at the same time, still providing spiritual tutelage and leadership for Bethel AME Church in Tallahassee, Florida.
That's right.
And so we were doing both. having the opportunity to be the bishop, the episcopate, and supervisor of the 9th Episcopal District, and then closing our ministry of 16 wonderful years. And some folks said, well, why don't you give it up? Why don't you move forward and just go to the 9th? And I knew within my spirit that I would never, ever have the opportunity to pastor again. And so I was grateful to Bishop Marvin Clyde Zanders II for giving me the opportunity to pastor some of God's greatest people at Bethel Church, and to know that I would never, ever in this life pastor again. My wife will tell you that my heart is being a shepherd, pastoring folk. I love being a pastor. The folk at Great Institutional will tell you. And they even came and called and said, Pastor, we want to help you with your campaign. Why haven't you called us? And I hadn't pastored them in 16 years. And for a cadre of men and women to put their resources together and to help us campaign. And then the folk from Payne Chapel in Chicago Heights, where I served for 3 years, and helped to shape and to formulate my ministry. My life, as I've already said, just being a pastor of 3 churches helped my maturation, my growth, but changed our lives exponentially.
You know, you've been mentioning some of these highlights, and I remember one of my favorite moments. I remember, let's give a shout out to Daryl over at Bethel, Tallahassee. He was one of the ones who made sure that we always got news from you all. And it is a testament to see how your congregations have loved you because you've loved them. And I mean, I can testify to that. You know, this ain't fake news. I'm being honest. But you know, thinking about where we are as a church, and now that you sit as one of the Episcopal fathers and one of our Episcopal supervisors, when you come to the General Conference in 2028, what do you want to say that you have done in the 9th District?
You know, I want people to ultimately say that Bishop and Supervisor, they gave their very best. One of the things that we have articulated to the men and women of the 9th Episcopal District, several hallmarks. We want to, first of all, make sure that we evangelize. 2, we want to make sure that we're good stewards of what God has given us. Stewardship. The third piece is ultimately looking at the way we do Christian education and making sure that not only do we reach and touch the senior saints, but also those persons who are much younger than we are. And then last but surely not least, we want to make sure that we leave a mark with our pastors in pastoral ministry, making sure that you love the people. I mean, it's an old spiritual adage, but it's true. If you love the people, they will love you back. It was Bishop Bob who said, Bishop Robert Thomas Jr., who was my first bishop as a pastor, and his credo was, his mantra was, love makes the difference. And he was absolutely right. Had a chance to serve as a youth pastor at Oak Grove AME Church, where then Reverend Dr. Gregory G.M. Ingram and Reverend Dr. Jessica Ingram served as the pastors and co-pastors of that church. And their mantra was called to make a difference. And I really believe that all of us, no matter who we are, if we're a bishop, a pastor, supervisor, we are called to make a difference. But most importantly, love makes the difference. Love the people and watch them love you back.
One thing, though, I can also say for me as missionary, that when we go to General Conference, that the missions work we have done is impactful, that we have touched people's lives through our service. And so we have got to look at missions differently than what we've done in the years past. It's all of the things that we read about and that God teaches us to do: feed the hungry, clothe the naked. But we've got to reach and be more unique in our service because the world is changing before our eyes. And so we as leaders, our leadership has to evolve so that we are reaching people. And one of the things that I'm excited about is making sure that when Bishop is appointing pastors and people as leaders that we are helping to change and grow congregations, finding the right fit so that missions and work and service can continue on. And that's one of my real concerns as an Episcopal supervisor is the work looks different than what my mom did. It looks different from the supervisors who are retired. It's just different now. And having young people living in our home, we know that.
Wow.
And so as leaders, we have to keep it on the forefront so that when we come and give a report of the work, our report should be one in which it reflects that we understand that we have to reimagine, and we reimagined what the church was and is for a time such as this.
I think there's several things that just I think it was like, wow, but just your first talking about the youth that you have in your home and how that influences your ministry and what you're seeing. And we saw a shift at the General Conference. I remember the last time we saw a shift like this was, I think, in 2004, when the class of 72 retired. And this is, the last of the baby boomers have retired off the bench. We're now looking at Gen X. We have young boomers and Gen X, and seeing how you all are doing ministry and the understanding that we need to adapt and what that needs to mean. That's a powerful witness and testimony, and understanding, what it means to do missions in this context. And first I have to say this, if y'all could see the bishop's purple gaiters on, you would love these. These are beautiful, and also the matching Episcopal rings. I've not seen a couple with matching Episcopal rings before. But just in all seriousness, you all shared I know we saw it, but it was a very special moment at General Conference, Bishop, when your father took his cross. It gave me chills when I saw him just take his cross off and give it to you. Had y'all planned that? Was that spontaneous, or?
The answer is no. I had no idea what he was doing. Matter of fact, I had my eyes closed, but I knew something was happening because I heard the folk in the congregation. And then when I felt him place the cross around my neck, I had no idea that it was his cross. So none of that was planned. I think that was on the spur of the moment. And he felt the tug to transfer what he had in his heart and spirit and transfer it over to me, and not just receiving the cross from my father, but also my mother, who at the time was in the hospital and didn't see my election, nor did she witness my consecration, because she was in the hospital at the time in Columbus, Ohio. So he, along with my mother, placing their spirit of love around my neck.
And I think we were talking earlier about not being punished for the last. I think you got the verdict on that when you saw the reaction, when you heard the reaction, because it was one of the holiest moments at the General Conference. It gave me, I was like, wow, it was just wow. Well, we thank you for the time you shared with us. We have a bishop and supervisor, so as our custom here, we're gonna let the bishop and supervisor have the last word before we leave. But again, just thank you for being here with us. So just, final thoughts for the Connectional Church as we enter into this new quadrennium and as you begin your first quadrennium of service to the church.
We're just so grateful to the Church of Richard and Sarah Allen to have this opportunity to share gifts and graces that we believe that God has given us. It's not about matching rings. It's not about attire or clothing. But I think the supervisor has said it right. It's about our service to humanity. And to be able to share a spirit of humility with people who we come across. I know my mother has said, when I was growing up, living in our home in Florence, South Carolina, and she would sometimes say, the people you meet on your way up you can meet on your way,
Mhm.
on your way down.
That's
Mhm.
right.
And that you ought to always have a spirit
Mhm.
of humility.
Mhm.
And within the life of our church, God has not called us
Mhm.
to be superstars.
Mhm.
No.
He's called us to ultimately to be a preacher, a pastor, a shepherd, a first lady, a supervisor, and to serve with all of our hearts, minds, and souls.
Wow.
So we're grateful.
Wow.
We are mighty grateful
Yeah.
to have the opportunity again to be able to serve the greatest church known to any of us.
Mhm.
And that's not taking away anything from anyone else.
Mhm.
But for us, it's the African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Amen. Supervisor?
Yeah, so I am just so fortunate because I think for me, it's a unique situation because I sit in the seat where I remember helping to elect my dad.
Mhm.
I remember helping to elect my father-in-law. And now I remember helping to elect my husband. I don't think there's anything that's ever existed like this in the church before. But one of the things I am looking forward to is making a mark, one in which I will inspire,
Wow.
or we will inspire others to want to serve.
Mhm.
Will inspire others to want to love and work with people. Will inspire people to go the extra mile on behalf of the church.
Mm.
And I want to make our ancestors proud. You hear that? We are our ancestors' wildest dreams.
Wow. Wow.
I want Sarah and Richard Allen and my father, who's no longer with us, to say, the work you have done
Mm.
has impacted God's people
Wow.
in a more excellent way. And we want to hear at the end of our service, well done.
Mhm.
So for me and for my husband, this work that God has called us to do, we will forever be grateful. And we don't take it lightly. And we know that God has something unique for us to do. And we're going to make sure that we uphold our promise, and that is to serve with dignity and with love and to offer grace.
Wow.
So that we can meet God's people where they are.
Wow. Supervisor McAllister, your grace, Bishop McAllister, thank you for
Thank
blessing
you.
us and sharing with us. And we look forward to seeing all of you next time on the Christian Recorder Dialogues.